Okay. How
All
do you want
right,
to
so
open
here we
this?
are, and you are back again. Back again. So
Wait,
excited.
wait, wait. Say that again because I was like
Ah,
talking over you. I was like,
oh,
how are we going to start this thing?
oh, I love it. I'm keeping all of this. I said, you're back again. I'm so
Ugh,
excited. I love when I have repeat guests.
too. And friends, blast from the past. Like every time I see you, it's like, oh, it takes me back to a time pre-kids, pre-full licensure,
Yes.
grad school. Like, I don't know, just a different
Yes.
time in life.
Because you were in grad school and I had my
Mhm.
LMSW and my LCDCI.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
So like
Oh
just
my gosh.
a different world, literally a different world. Like I was,
Literally.
when I was there, it was 2014. So we're talking like Obama
Oh
era,
my gosh. Yeah, 10 years ago.
pre-quarantine, all of that.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So it's
We're
a really
literally
fun time.
different people now, right? Like
Yes.
physiologically, we've had
Yes.
children, we
Yes.
have,
Yes.
you know, that's crazy to think about. We are different.
Yeah. It really is. It's my very first episode that I had a guest, my very first guest episode. I used to do some of these by myself. Um, my first guest, we talked about like the new identity in like after parenthood and how
Hmm.
to hold on to the pieces of yourself that feel like you and mourn the pieces that are gone and not
Yeah,
judge yourself for having some sadness about it being gone because mom guilt's not a real thing and navigating that all plus trying to make new friends and navigating your children making new friends just it's all
all of it.
wild
Well,
time.
and I mean, everything you're saying is like fits in really well with what we're going to talk about, like the reparenting concept, because
Yes.
I don't know, I feel like maybe dormant parts of yourself kind of like reawaken as you move into those new experiences in life and phases, and parenthood being one of those things, right? It's like, oh, I thought I had like grown myself in all these ways, and then zing, there's this part of me that's like, hey, very much still have this need over here that you haven't addressed, and
Yeah,
uh our healing and development is the gift that keeps on giving.
indeed. As long, I think the most important thing, the best part of it is to meet yourself with grace, right? Like when you get punched
Yes.
in the face by something that you didn't realize that you had shoved down so long ago and it comes flying back out to you. It's like, oh, okay. All we can do is be where we are. That's okay. Yep. Okay.
Hmm. Because that can be so hard. I think that we both relate to the high achiever, perfectionistic. For me, I can relate a lot to like people pleaser tendency type thing, and giving yourself grace toward all that stuff when it pops up, when you think that you are past it, when you think you've grown so much, that really is key.
Yeah,
Because not giving yourself that, I don't know, it just kind of sucks you back into the old ways, self-criticism and contempt toward yourself and all that stuff. So, very good point. I agree 100%.
I before I was when I lived in Houston, so it was 2019, perhaps early 2020, or even before that. I was listening to it was Will Arnett on Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard, and he said,
Hmm.
"Man, if beating myself up worked, man, I'd be cured by now." And I have been using that in therapy with clients so many times because I talk a lot about avoiding forced positivity and how to be intentional about having perspective and allowing yourself to take some space if it could be worse, but also avoiding and therefore I'm not allowed to be upset about it at all of the forced positivity. Some say toxic positivity, but I think force is a much more intentional word. Um,
Yeah.
and it's a really nice succinct moment of like, does beating yourself up help? Does Has that worked for you in the past? Do you feel like it moves the needle? Does it feel like it helps you to grow in a meaningful way? And I will tell you,
Hmm.
this episode's gonna have an E on it. I do have some clients who, like, when they're working out, they're like, "You done fucking bitch, you better run fast, run, like, pick up those weights, da da da." And I'm like, okay, well, far be it for me to tell you what's working for you in your workouts. So if that's what's
Yeah.
making you get, if that's what's help, excuse me, not making, if that's what's helping you get through that class, again, not injuring yourself, whatever, like some of that can be helped,
Right, right.
sure. But generally speaking, in terms of the intentional emotional growth and tending to your needs. If beating yourself up worked, a lot of us would be cured by now. And so, how do we step away from
I
that?
love
A
that.
lot.
I'm secondarily stealing that from Will
Take it.
Arnett through you.
Will Arnett.
I know I
Yes.
will. I don't think I heard that episode.
Yeah. Oh, I mean,
But I can't get through those episodes, man. They're too long. Like I don't have the time. I love them though, but I never finish. But I love that you said that, Meg, because I'm just kind of collecting it all and, berating yourself, talking to yourself that way, motivation through self-deprecation, right? I think I'm sitting with the question of like, where does that come from? So many places. I think it comes from our culture.
sure.
I think it can come from family systems, right? Some of that
Mhm.
stuff is literally the voice or the voices of others to us when we were young and growing. And like that's how we were spoken to.
Mhm.
And then I just think that, you know, it's all about relationship to self, like largely that way of relating to your own self was learned. It was learned
Mhm.
in some container, this petri dish of your upbringing and your environment. And
Mhm.
that's why, like, there's luckily for us, right? There's so much more research now and ways of helping people through things like complex PTSD, the repeated environmental factors through which we grow up, right? And that can totally manifest in the languaging that we use with ourselves because it's what
Mhm.
we learned at very young, developmentally important ages.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I love that saying. And it's not like you can just identify it and acknowledge it and stop doing it tomorrow. It takes cultivating, I think, like a real new practice with yourself to
Yes.
not perpetuate that kind of treatment toward yourself. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that is something that's very helpful, keeping in mind that none of this is an overnight thing. Like I've got clients of all ages from in college to about to retire and everyone between. And it's like, well, you've been doing this for X number of years this way. Just because I tell you
Yeah.
great little mantra doesn't mean the good news. I always say this a lot too. We're thinking about making changes. Like we're trying
Yeah.
to recognize, right? We're just trying to recognize in the moment when we're doing something that's people pleasing or the negative self-talk or participating in mom guilt, which is not a thing. Like, okay, I did that. Maybe next time I could do something differently. Or certainly if you've got the
Yeah.
space and the motivation or the energy or whatever that looks like, then do try to make that change in that moment. But also
Yeah.
thinking about making changes. And if it were easy, you'd already be doing it. I swear I want to get like some neons up here and just like that
I know
one's
you need like a quote board. These are
yes.
like, yep. You've got all the mic drops happening in like the
Yeah.
span of two sentences. It's not fair.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just always encourage people to think of it that way. Like if
Hmm.
because I love a mantra moment, and mantras are too woo-woo for people. So, like an expression, a saying, a reminder. I'm also deeply humor-based. So, anything that can help somebody kind of chuckle in the moment, especially if you're feeling frustrated with yourself or the situation, if you can, like, oh, I talked about this in therapy with Meg, and I'm gonna die. I'm like, oh, haha, that was so funny when she, like, bringing the humor to it. And in that moment, to
Yeah.
say, like, beating myself up does not work. So, what else can I do right now? And
Right.
then consider how to go forward from there.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, even though I've gone real deep with like my modalities, I guess, in helping clients and even helping myself,
Uh-huh.
I still very much go back a lot of times to the good old red stop sign. It's like just
Hmm.
visualize that stop sign. Just
Yes.
stop the thing you're doing right now, because that
Yes.
that break, that pause, that moment of self-awareness really is a
Yes.
huge on-ramp
Yes.
to being able to like get to those eventual new ways of being with yourself.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Well, can you, because I know I'm actually not, I mean, I've definitely read like adult children of immature parents and all that. But I'm not, I wouldn't say that reparenting and inner child work are things that I really focus on a lot in my sessions. So I'm wondering if you can explain like what reparenting means and how does that show up in adulthood?
Yeah, totally. Well, you have heard of PMLity, right? Because I feel
Mhm.
like even back in our treatment center days, a lot of her stuff, her work that she cultivated through the Meadows Treatment Center, was just really huge. And so Pia's work goes back to like the 80s, I think. And over the decades, a lot of her work has integrated with stuff I've become trained in. Like I went and got trained in relational life couples therapy, and Terry Real was actually taught and mentored by Pia Melody, and so his model very much incorporated her methods, which is really all about like inner child work, the developmental trauma, childhood trauma, just a lot of these adults dealing with codependency in adulthood and just they've lost themselves in relationship or addiction or like whatever the ailment or issue or challenge may be. And her model essentially brought people back to this real deep core work on working with the inner child. And so I'm not actually trained in Pia Melody's model, but she trained two others, Jan Bergstrom and Rick Butts, who are my mentors. They created the Healing Our Core Issues Institute. And you can actually go to their website and see their whole model. But it's essentially Pia's work. They trained under her, and she gave her blessing for them to continue forward developing their institute, which is basically those processes kind of filtered in with like their perspective and lens on looking at things. And so I'm fully trained in that. It's a developmental and relational trauma therapy certification.
Nice.
And reparenting is, the core essence of this work. And it is what it sounds like. You're reparenting yourself. And, for those that don't know, but I know like I started as a couples therapist, and I'm not going to say I burned out completely, but the RLT couples therapy world really, because it was informed by all this work, it really brought me back to this kind of like individual trauma space because like a lot of times it's our stuff, our blocks that are really getting in the way of us being able to connect, let ourselves really be vulnerable with a partner, to know how to like attune to our partner's trauma stories and just like who they had to learn to become to adapt and to survive essentially. And so I just went all in, and essentially all of my work now is actually with individuals. So I'm a very relationally informed individual therapist. Oh my
Mhm.
gosh, that sounds so fancy.
It does sound very fancy. And
But
it's so important, the relational piece, because we don't
yeah,
operate in silos. And
exactly.
so as much beautiful work as you can do individually, and as much as we know we can't control other people, we do also want to take
Yeah,
that thought process of how can I utilize this in this conversation with this romantic partner and this colleague and this friend and so on and so forth. Very important.
exactly. And, there's a lot of incredible couples therapy models out there, EFT being one that I think about that's, very evidence-based in nature and like really sort of works with healing from kind of like the relationship as a base out.
Hmm.
And while that's always made a ton of sense to me, this path of training that I took, I've always looked at it a little bit as like coming to the work from the opposite direction. Like I'm working on the inner stuff going on here with Liz, and from there I can really be be intimate from my healthiest space and the visual of like having these inner children, these younger child parts of me that live inside me that are my responsibility. I get to take care of them, help me kind of like hold on to all the parts of me and actually show up from the adult, most functional part of myself in my relationships. And to, discern like who in my life gets to know all those parts of me and who do I need to just keep in here and let be mine. So without kind of sounding too ambiguous about it, I mean, reparenting is really first identifying all those parts of yourself that are
Hmm.
inside. Really kind of reminds me of like the IFS concepts,
Hmm.
Internal Family Systems has done a lot of really incredible things and fits in very well with this model that I use, but just kind of like different labels and ways of going in. I like the Healing Our Core Issues model because it's really simple to me. It's
Hmm.
like, just notice and see what's there as you do some guided it's like guided meditation work sometimes to just
Mm.
invite awareness. Like, who is my inner child? Some people have never explored this concept in their life, right? And so you can sit there just right now. It's like closing your eyes and just inviting, like, hey, who's in there? And when you're really intentional about just offering that space to yourself, like stuff comes up, stuff comes up. And so, from getting to know those different parts of yourself, you really identify like, yeah, who's adult Liz and who's maybe like historic Liz that's really holding on to some unresolved pains or things that she went through that at the time didn't get to really be, like no closure, right? No closure, wounds left unopened kind of thing. And so reparenting allows me to really hone in on cultivating my functional adult self so that that part of me can reparent and attune to the younger parts of me that didn't get what they needed back then. That is basically what reparenting is.
I love that. Thank you for that definition. I imagine a number of people have heard of it or maybe not even heard of it, but certainly didn't have that much of an awareness about it. One of the questions I feel like I get asked so much when I go on shows or if I'm writing an article for somebody or something of that nature is when can you tell that you need therapy? And for me, I sit in such a place of privilege and obviously bias as a therapist. And I'm like, now,
Yeah.
yesterday, if you're thinking about it, of course. Yeah, yes.
Everybody all the time. Yeah.
Yes, right. And certainly I love to encourage in the perinatal space, like if you're thinking about trying to get pregnant, if you are trying to get pregnant, if you are having fertility issues, if you are pregnant, if you've just had a baby and you're considering the next time, like all of those things, considering when you want to have the next baby, all of those things in the postpartum. Um, and it was interesting because my most recent guest was talking about healthy gaming, and I said I actually don't know the answer to that. Like, when do you recognize that you might need some help in your gaming behaviors? And she was talking about obviously if it's becoming a problem for you, if it's becoming a problem with your relationships, and so on. So that sorry for
Yeah.
this very long intro to this question, but it's such one that I hear so much. And what are some common signs for you that you recognize someone might benefit from some inner child work?
Yeah. That's a great question. Because honestly, it's not this like straight, clear, black and white answer. I mean, I
Right.
think that it could just range from the obvious, maybe more extreme signs of like, oof, I have found myself just really caught in the throes of an addiction and my life is chaos, or I'm just enabling this really unhealthy situation in my life that is not serving me, that's maybe harming somebody else. Like those more clear, like, hey, red light, it's time to get some help would be the perfect time, obviously. And sometimes not the perfect time for the reparenting inner child work. Like if you are in that kind of space where I just described, you really want to take that time and intention to, get the more intensive help, get things to a more balanced place.
Mhm.
Because inner child work opens up a lot. You are kind of like cracking yourself open and inviting this exploration of deeper things that a lot of times are even so um what is the word I'm trying to think of? Like repressed a lot of times, or just really, really contained,
Mhm.
sometimes contained deep in your subconscious that you don't even know this stuff is going on in there. So you want to have resources around you. You want to be in a space, in a situation where you feel like you have support and yeah, just resources to fall back on to help you get through doing work like this. But all that to say, I think that anytime you're experiencing like emotional disturbance or feel like you're getting in your own way, like you're the bottleneck to your own life, or maybe in work or even relationship, you feel like things just can't get where you wish they would go. And it just seems like things are always never working out, like that's another time I think. Um, Doing the training, like so many modalities out there, they want you to go through it yourself. So I went through the whole process myself too. And I think it worked out nice. Obviously, I went this direction because there was something that was really pulling my heart and soul to this type of work. It really resonated with me. And I think that in reflection, I was just in a real place of readiness to face a lot of things about my upbringing and family of origin experience and childhood. And I was curious what's in there. Like, jokingly, I told my colleagues at the time, like, this stuff feels like going to Disneyland for me because I get to learn it to give it to others, but I'm ready for the work. Like, I just felt really ready and really willing and very open to whatever may come from it. And so, there's that too. But it's like that book, The Body Keeps the Score. I think everybody tuning into their own body, to their own physical, maybe symptoms that tell them something is not right. Those are all like open invitations, I think, to trying some work like this out.
Yeah. I,
What do you think? I
as
want to know what you think.
I'm very excited as you were saying that. I'm like, wow, I guess I'm doing a little more of this than I even realized without naming it such. Of Because I have so many clients who are coming into awareness of ADHD or a variable attention stimulus trait in some sort of way and
Hmm.
recognizing the behaviors and the patterns that had occurred in childhood and throughout their lives. Again, I've got people in college and I've got people about ready to retire. So everyone and everywhere in between.
Yeah.
And it has been really interesting, some of the conversations that I'm having about that coming back to the self-talk piece and where does that self-talk come from? And I talk to people about this too, of like your core values are right now perhaps your core values, but how much of that both is an internal message and how much of that is an external message? And really taking the time
Yeah.
to unpack it. Do I actually care about this? Do I actually believe this? Or is that because that's how I was raised? That's the neighborhood I grew up in, so on and so forth. That's the culture that I grew up in. And so for me, it's talking a lot about like that self-talk piece, like you and I were talking earlier about how I'm trying to pick up my business a little bit in certain ways. And I don't know if you remember
Mhm.
me saying, but I kept saying like, I'm not going to say I'm lazy. I'm not going
Yeah,
to
you
say
said it
I'm
like three
lazy.
times.
I did. And that's because there's a book over here. And we don't say crazy because crazy is ableist. And everybody, please stop using that word. But the book is called You Mean I'm Not Lazy, Stupid, or Crazy? Because that's
Yeah.
the message that people with ADHD got. And the book's from, I don't remember the original publishing, but my mom had it in the 90s, I'll tell you. And
Oh,
that's why, because I have so many clients with their ADHD and they're used to a partner telling them they're lazy, a parent telling them they're lazy. They can't figure out why they can't get something done in certain what cleaning the house, putting away Christmas, cleaning your desk at work. I mean, we could go on with examples. And it's obviously because I'm lazy and dumb. And it's like, no, 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 this is how our reptilian brain, when we lived in the hive, anthropologically speaking, our
hmm.
dyslexia, even Dak Shepard, sorry to keep mentioning him, he has dyslexia and a degree from UCLA in anthropology. And he says, like, that was the
Hmm.
whole thing before we had this neurotypical forced sit in front of a desk society. And so
Right.
being able to go back and be like, what are you saying to yourself? Is that helpful?
Right.
Are you beating
Right.
yourself up? Are you calling yourself lazy? And for me, it was really
Yeah.
important to me in our conversation earlier before we hit record of like, I'm not being lazy, but I think complacent is a really intentional and appropriate word of like, well, things have been going pretty well for me, but with the business. So I've just kind of been coasting, which hasn't been a bad thing because I moved a year ago and a lot's going on. And also that, like, okay, recognizing. So I,
Well, and like if I can filter what you just said through this kind of lens that I use with the reparenting work,
yes.
like that second part you were just speaking out of like, well, complacent is a more intentional word. Like you shifted it in your body, like you started reasoning this out in a very meaningful way for yourself that really lacked any judgment. You were being understanding. Like that is what we call your functional adult self. We call it your FA, functional adult. That's the part of you that this work tries to help cultivate. And
Mhm.
from there, when we lead from that part of us that, like an ideal good modern day parent would know, It's not my responsibility to be perfect all the time. It's normal to have struggles in life. Everybody does.
Yeah.
I will get through this. I am capable of figuring this out and, like all that sort of stuff. Functional adult self. The younger parts, the maybe more historically sourced narratives that we use, right? Like, oh my gosh, I'm just lazy, or the part of us that can kind of shift and activate into self-judgment or really based out of the fear, right? And fear makes us want to get protective and defensive and, all these kinds of things. That's what we call the adaptive child.
Mhm.
And the adaptive child is the part of us that whenever ago needed to learn to do exactly that to survive something, to
Mhm.
feel safe in a situation where we weren't getting the teaching or the treatment or the environment that helped us learn what your functional adult is now doing. Because
Mhm.
there wasn't anybody around back then to really ground us. Or like maybe there was. This model definitely is not about like blame, although it is about rightful reassignment of responsibility.
But again, let's
And
just take a moment and talk about the difference in those two language, like those two, like
yeah,
blame is blame and judgment, and also taking the responsibility away from myself because I can't control that and I can't put that on myself. Like, but I'm not just like,
or it's like literally somebody else's carried pain, carried
yes,
trauma, you
yes.
know. And by the way, I want to give credit where credit is due in our Healing Our Core Issues community. LaShonda Sugg is one of the clinicians that I got to do my intensive through, and she is phenomenal.
Mhm.
I believe her website is Labors of Love, but she has a great podcast. You need to collaborate with her because she's amazing. Oh my gosh, you would freaking love her. But she coined that term rightful reassignment of responsibility because sometimes we are walking around life carrying this narrative. I'm not good enough. I'll never get there. I don't deserve it. And that's kind of the story if you look back, generations before you. Struggle, pain, a lot of shame, environments where children are just born up into these environments seeping with shame.
Yeah.
And so another part of this work is sussing that out and kind of figuring out like what is actually mine that I can reparent and learn to tend to in a different way, or like what do I just need to gently hand back to whoever tried to give me that. And it feels really important to say, like, this process and this work is very experiential. We're not just sitting talking about this stuff like you and I are doing. We're actually in the moment doing a lot of empty chair work. We're like having clients actually speak to the inner child parts of themselves. And like later on, way later on in the work, we actually do empty chair work that involves any of those important people, significant people, dead or alive, that need to take back some of that trauma that we have just carried forward. And it's just incredibly powerful and moving work. It's really unbelievable. But you're using all of you in a process like this, and I think that's what makes it so impactful is people are actually doing this and creating brand new neural pathways and different ways of relating to themselves and also others in their life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how we got on all that, but I love it. It's amazing.
I love it so much. What I really love about this show is that I feel like it's not your and my job or place to give anybody permission to do anything. And I feel like that's exactly what this show does. Like, oh my gosh, when you say it like that, it makes so much sense. I'm allowed to do that. Okay. And again, not that I'm
Yeah.
saying, yes, go forth and be emotionally intelligent, but yes, you are allowed to say, I've hit the ball back into your court and I'm leaving the court. And that's okay. And gently again, not like, middle fingers and F you and blame, blame, but just it's important to have these conversations and to consider different ways of looking
Yeah.
at that because we hold on to so much from our childhood. And again, that
Yeah.
we believe that we believe that. And then sometimes I'll have a conversation with a client, just globally, obviously no identifying information, and I'll ask again, how much of that is internal and how much of that is external? And a lot of times people are shocked, like I've never thought about that before. I've never
Right, because
felt
they
anything
just
like
they just thought that it all lived inside and was the truth and like that's that, but once you actually get them to kind of differentiate a little bit, like wow, that can just be so game changing, so game changing.
that.
Yeah. And just to use like kind of a typical example, but a lot of this work that manifests relationally that people want to do does connect back to like parents, right? And the parenting, whether that was kind of a typical, two-parent household thing or multi or no parents. I mean, there was some like primary caregiver that was in this, relationship to the client or whoever might do this work. And they have a saying in Hawkeye that I just love more than anything. And it's, again, using parents as the example here, that the best part of your parent would want you to have this healing.
Mm.
And that's just always resonated with me because
Mm.
our parents aren't perfect people either. The caregivers, whoever, those significant
The adult.
adults in our childhood, right? Yeah. They weren't perfect. And so many times children idolize the adult in their life, even if they treated them terribly, right? They're on this pedestal. They're kind of
No.
like just
Yes.
unbreakable, right?
Yes.
But that's not reality. And a part of this work is allowing the functional adult in you to look at these people in your life through the lens of reality. They were imperfect human, just like you.
Hmm.
And their best self would probably want you to have this healing. And that really helps people feel, I think, a lot of hope in facing some of the stuff that's there to, heal from and whatever. Because it's kind of like grief work too, believe it or not, to stay in that trauma and in the negative
Hmm.
dynamic can actually feel safer because at least there's a relationship.
Hmm. It's so important it is a grief. I mean, I listened to, I don't want to say too many podcasts, but I listen to so many, and it's interesting that when people are talking about their parenting relationships, and I was listening to Matt Rogers and Bowen Yang on Las Culturistas, and they were talking about how in this conversation, we're talking about they believe that that parent and child relationship is the most important one, even romantically, on anything, and thinking about in thinking of that conversation, I was thinking of another, like that led to that, led to that, led to that, of the idea of how much people struggle with that, or even saying, I'm not going to bring that up to my parents because I don't want them to feel bad, or I don't want them to
Yeah.
feel guilty, or like they've traumatized me, or whatever that looks like. And some of that is like an internal boundary or an internal conversation, and not all of it has to be brought to the parent, and some of it can be, and that's a
Yeah.
very individual. Even within your one individual, this could be brought up as a new boundary. This is an internal boundary that I'll keep
Right.
to myself, and so on. But there are so many people who struggle with that idea of, well, they did the best they can, and I don't want to make them feel bad, so I'm just going to keep on keeping on. But I love the idea of in
Hmm.
in their best moment, they want the best for you, even if you two aren't even
Yep.
speaking anymore or have an agreed
Right.
um what falling out. I'm like outfalling, falling. I could not get
That
out of
could work too.
outfalling. I'm like, that's not a thing. Falling out. Thinking about though, and that's not. I mean, generally when people have kids, even if they think of the best that they can do and want the best.
Hmm. Right. And like a flip of that whole dynamic you're talking about there of turning to the parent and looking to the parent through the lens of reality, right? The flip of that again is myself, my functional adult self, to my adaptive inner child. And it's not about going inward and saying, stop self-criticizing, little inner child. Stop. You're going to stop being that way now. No, it's actually about leaning in and attuning and loving that part of yourself just as they are because they had to learn to do that and they did it for good reason. So it's actually honoring the
Mhm.
wisdom of those younger historical parts of yourself because they kind of like carried you through all of it. And we say like adaptive then, maladaptive now.
Hmm.
Worked really well back then,
Yeah.
got you through some tough stuff, made a
Fine.
lot of sense, made a lot of sense. But now the move doesn't serve you so well anymore, right? So
Mhm.
maybe you can sit back and kind of like go to the back of the bus, not the driver's seat, because I've got my hands on the wheel now. You don't have to do that anymore.
Mhm.
And I'm talking out kind of like, logically, obviously, this process. But again, it's very much this mind's eye work. And I haven't said that part yet, but when I talk about it being experiential work, the client's eyes are closed. We're getting them into a very relaxed, meditative place in their body. We're helping them attune to those like resources in themselves so that from their functional adult self, they can go find this younger part that
Mhm.
kind of needs to be loved on and needs that adult part of you to give them what they never got. And
Mhm.
this will happen in like a range of different ways. Some clients can really go there quickly and visualize it and find that part of themselves,
Mhm.
and they can do that work. And other times they'll try and it's really hard. There's a lot of blockers.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe doesn't IFS call that like the protectors, the firefighters, there's these parts of us that don't want to let us in to find those parts because they're so walled off. They're so used to having to kind of be hard and be tough and not let the wall down that they won't even let us in to
Right.
our own self.
Well,
And so
and I
that's a
hold
part of
space.
this work is just getting there.
I hold space for that. I mean, so much of what we do is, oh,
Yeah.
I was listening to Mel Robbins, Let Them. If you don't mind, I'm going to put my phone up real quick because I think I wrote it down. And
Yeah.
if not, I will paraphrase. Suffering
You
comes.
listen to so many good podcasts. I'm like low key jealous. I'm like, oh, I don't have time for
Well, I'm
anything.
listening to her book, Let Them. But yes, I have a little book club with my girlfriend,
Mm.
Merrick. And we are in chapter 2, and it says, I didn't put it down. Suffering comes from resisting reality, which comes from Buddhism. And she was just doing her
Mhm.
Googling and for her book. And we some of us have gotten so good at resisting reality and living in the blessed place of denial, as I express it. That's a Kristen Chenoweth line from GCB from the teens. That I want to hold all the space for you. You're real good at pretending like none of this is a problem for you. And
Yeah.
acknowledging that it's a problem is going to be a problem. Like it's going to be harder than right now. But at some point, right, it's like, what is the expression of the pain of change outweighing the pain of staying the same? And then when that balance shifts,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so something's going on where whatever you're doing to pretend living in the blessed place of denial is no longer working for you. So I will hold space. It's going to be tough. And I've even said that to clients before, like sometimes you leave therapy and you don't necessarily feel better, air quotes, when you
Hmm.
came in, but that doesn't mean that you didn't do some work. And it is hard. And
Yeah.
also, again, doesn't mean, but I like what you said too earlier about like, that's what worked for you when you were, that is what worked. You made, and another thing too, of like,
Hmm.
you made the best choice you could with the information you had at the time. And now we have
Hmm.
hindsight, and hindsight's 2020. So of course it's easy for us to be like, I shouldn't have done this and I shouldn't have done that and shit all over ourselves. But
Yeah. Totally.
acknowledging like I made the best choice I could with the information that I had at the time. And then moving forward from that now, like you said, like go to the back, hang out in the back of the bus, pull out a book,
Hmm.
take
Hmm.
a pause, take a breath. I'm in control over here. Well, I'm driving the bus, let's say. Let's not say control.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I know. Yeah, because it's those backseat drivers that want to say, "Let me be in control," but
Mhm.
control, no one's in control, right?
Yes.
But yeah, wheels on, hands on the wheel, hands on the wheel is what I'm getting at. And
Yeah.
it's funny too, like because I've got young kids, and so sort of aligning with the timeline of doing this training and deepening in this work, I'm also having my own kids and like
Yes.
really entering into the world of parenting
Yes.
like actual human children outside of my body.
Yes.
And it's funny because I find like a lot of these great parenting books out there are giving me the tools for the reparenting my inner child. And it's like, yeah, it's been like a nice twofold because this therapy modality also informs my parenting and how I
Yes.
want to try to show up as a nurturing parent from my most functional self.
Mhm.
decided like, gentle parenting is really just not for me because ba boundaries are incredibly important. And, it just helps you define like how you want to show up and paints a
Yeah.
clearer picture for yourself, but also those real life interactions.
Well, and it's hard too, because it's like, I think it's hard for us as therapists, or maybe just me individually as therapists. I certainly can't speak for everybody in any subset of any section of anything, but like we do go to school and we do have to pick do you want mental health or clinical? And do you want to do inpatient? Do you want to do outpatient? Do you want to do CBT? Do you want to do REBT? We have these things that we kind of have to define, we have to niche, especially if you're in private practice. Like, oh my gosh, niche.
Yeah.
That's how you get people. And so it's interesting for me as we're talking, I'm thinking about how kind of like I try to participate that in some way with my parenting. Like I'm supposed to have this one, like,
Mm,
here's my thesis and my research paper and all of my bibliography and everything on my parenting and what I'm going to do. And then really it is some of that, and a lot of it is a day at a time, and a lot of it is one situation at a time, and how to navigate that and allowing ourselves to not have all of the answers is a scary place to
yeah, because
be, because that's not an option for so many of us, even if you're not a therapist, whatever,
yeah,
that's just not an
yeah.
option.
There's so much nuance, and I can relate a lot to sort of growing up, I guess, in that culture and just that trajectory where it's like get really good at the thing you're going to do, become the expert, right? Specialize.
Yes.
And there's just so much out there though, and like life's not linear, nothing is
Yes.
straightforward. Like there's always going to just be all this gray area around us, right? So, yeah, I appreciate that because through this work, I've had to deconstruct a lot about how I've been in my own life and with myself because more than one of my adaptive children really like things to be perfect and rigid and
Yes.
unrealistically
Yes.
prioritizing pleasing others around me versus actually living in alignment with what I believe is true and have decided for myself as a functional grown-ass adult.
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, I have literally so many other questions that I want to ask you. One of them literally was like, how can parents, mothers specifically navigate guilt and perfectionism while trying to break those generational cycles and like motherhood and wellness in general and
Yeah.
balancing self and parenthood and breaking generational patterns. It's like I feel like we could have
Yeah.
we could do like a whole series or a whole season just on this topic because it is so very important and intentional to consider all of these things. And again, like the boundaries piece and the internal boundaries versus the external boundaries, and what do we bring up to.
Yeah, boundaries are huge. Like boundaries are critical. I mean, we could just let's just do that. Let's do another one just like about boundaries because I have a lot to say about that one.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
really and truly, it's probably one of the most significant pieces when it comes to like, so what does the solution look like, right? In the world of healing and trying to live differently.
Yes,
But
yes,
yeah, yeah,
yes. Well, I'll have you
100%.
back on again and again and again, and all the times and all of that. For now, for the show notes, can you tell everybody where they can find you?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I'm at Millennial Life Counseling in Dallas, and we've been doing our thing since about 2017. Primarily, couples therapists reside at our place, but we do a lot of this kind of work that I'm describing today, just individual relationship focused trauma work and childhood stuff, and everything under the sun related to improving relational wellness. And
Mhm.
you can find us at millenniallifecounseling.com, or if you want a shorter URL, you can do hellomlc.com. But that's where you can find me. And you can listen to my podcast, which you should totally come be on again too. The
Sign me
Millennial
up,
Life
yes.
Podcast.
And what's your Instagram
Me
handle
too.
for? It'll be in the show notes, but
Yeah, both of them, Instagram and Facebook, are at Millennial Life Counseling. I really should shorten those, but have not yet.
um, you know, it's hard to rebrand and think about. And again,
I
we're
know,
not
right?
lazy. It's just not that it's not the thing that I'm
It's just,
trying to figure out right now.
yeah.
Yes. Oh my
Being very
goodness.
kind to myself as I say that is not the top priority on my list right now.
Not,
But you
not.
can find us there.
Yes, so I want those will be in the show notes for sure. Well, thank you again because I haven't done reparenting and inner child a topic on that here, and I find that a number of people. I mean, I think it's just seriously 100% of us listening could find some piece of that that's like, oh hey, oh
Yeah,
huh, I hadn't thought, and it's just very important. So, thanks everybody again for coming back and hanging out with us, and we'll be back again and to talk more about boundaries. And I don't know, we'll see. Many other topics, I think. But until we see you next time, be
absolutely.
not judgmental, and we'll see you next time.